Good afternoon and good evening to those of you and good morning to those of you in Australia. Welcome to session 6 of the ESIG 2021 Spring Technical Workshop. We have another great session lined up for today, looking at what's going on in the wonderful world of green hydrogen. I'm Charlie Smith, the Executive Director of ESIG, and I'll provide a few brief opening remarks. As you know, our spring workshop sessions are all being held online and are open to everyone. The workshop was planned with the input of our ESIG Offerings Committee, chaired by Bethany Frew of NREL and Julia Matoivasan of ERCOT. The committee consists of the chairs of our 6 working groups and several of our board members. We have a great set of volunteers who really make ESIG what it is, and we encourage you to become involved if you're not already. Regarding logistics, I would ask you to note that the webinar will be 90 minutes long. We had a lot of feedback that our 1-hour workshop sessions were too rushed, so we're experimenting with some longer formats for the spring workshop. Our advisors will have 3 individual presentations of approximately 20 minutes each in the first hour, followed by 20 Q&A after the last speaker. As we are doing with all of our workshops now, we will be using the slide for managing the Q&A, not the WebEx platform. You should go to slido.com on your device and enter ESIG18 as the event code to ask your questions. Please be sure to indicate the person to whom you're addressing the question. The instructions are also in the background slide for the webinar, and you'll be reminded by the session chair. You'll see a thumbs up button next to the question on Slido to allow you to vote on prioritizing the questions submitted. So please keep the questions coming during the presentations, and we will address them at the end. We will follow up with written answers to any questions we don't get to during the Q&A. Recognizing the limitations of a webinar with more than 100 people on the lines will be muted. So again, we ask you to use the Slido platform to ask your questions with ESIG18 as the event code. Today's session asks the question, is there green hydrogen in your future? If you had asked me if there were batteries in my future 10 years ago, I would have said, not a chance. But today, if you asked me the same question about green hydrogen, I would say, absolutely. Looking at a future where most of our generation could be coming from resources characterized by variability and uncertainty, where we can identify a clear need for long-term energy storage, this is clearly an important topic. The session will be chaired by Bethany Frew of NREL, who I mentioned is a co-chair of our meetings planning committee, also a member of our board of directors. Bethany is a familiar face at ESIG and is well known to many of you. We're very happy to have you with us today. Bethany is going to take us on a whirlwind tour of green hydrogen around the world. Bethany, we appreciate your participation, and I'll now turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Charlie. And hello to everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm really excited for this session. I think there's been a lot of momentum growing around hydrogen, particularly green hydrogen, which just refers to hydrogen that was produced from renewable energy, including wind and solar, and also hydropower. So a lot of this momentum has been growing because of policies that have been passed, of the need to reach decarbonization goals, and particularly for some of the harder to electrify components of the energy sector, hydrogen is seen as a viable option. It also can help to support the integration of renewables. There was a recent report from NREL published last October, the H2 at scale concept, which our first speaker is going to briefly mention in his presentation. But one of my favorite results from that report shows that if we're able to help reduce the cost for electrolysis, that can actually help to increase the deployment of wind and solar resources. And so really it can be an enabling technology for many of the technologies that we've been talking about in the ESIG community for years. So just really excited to kind of see where this goes with hydrogen. I know just feedback I've received from people in different conversations, there's still some skepticism around how viable hydrogen actually is. And so hopefully we can address some of those in this session today and help to provide some clarity around some of the concerns that folks have. Also just kind of want to acknowledge some of the items that have been in the recent news related to green hydrogen. our first presenter, Corky Mittelsteadt, his company Plug Power, which he'll be talking about. I noticed in the news there are some announcements about new facilities that they're going to be building, and really just a lot of momentum with that technology. Also in the news, Germany and Canada have been having a lot of conversations around green hydrogen from hydropower in Canada and exporting that to Germany. So just some really big steps that have been happening even just in recent news. And so we're going to explore, again, this topic of green hydrogen from lots of different perspectives around the world, as Charlie mentioned. We're going to start with some work that's being done in North America and the United States. Then we're going to go to Australia, and then we're going to go to the North Sea in Europe. And so hopefully, those of you that are coming from kind of the power systems background, which I think is traditionally kind of a lot of the folks in our ESIG community, will be able to have a greater appreciation for how this green hydrogen in particular, can again be an enabling technology for this broader energy systems integration concept that we're working on within ESIG, looking at transmission, grid storage applications, and residential and business applications. And of course, that's just one sector, or one piece of the broader section of applications that hydrogen can be used for, including ammonia, even steel production. So lots of uses out there for hydrogen, lots of geographic locations where this is happening. So hopefully this session, again, will help with connecting a lot of those dots for many of you. So we're going to get started with our first speaker, Corky Mittelsteadt, who's the vice president of a company called Plug Power. He's the vice president specifically of the electrolyzer technology portion. He is the technical director for the electrolyzer stack technology, and also takes on the role of a general manager for the Concord, Massachusetts facility, where he's responsible for establishing a new manufacturing, R&D, and sales center. Before coming to Plug Power, Corky was at a company called Giner for 21 years, and in the last 4 years of that served as a CEO. Part of his role there was in a spin-off company of Giner that actually was later acquired by Plug Power in June of 2020. Corky is seen as an expert in the field, having won multiple awards from DOE for his PEM, the proton exchange membrane contributions, and also authored chapters on membrane characterization and electrolysis. So Corky, we're pleased to have you here today and are looking forward to the overview from Plug Power's perspective.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Bethany, and thanks so much for the opportunity. And I hope that you're correct in that there's a lot of skeptics in the crowd there, because there's absolutely no doubt that that hydrogen is going to be making a huge impact over the coming years. I think the implementation and the cost reductions are going to be even much quicker than we saw for solar and for batteries. So very excited to talk you through my viewpoint here. Okay, as Bethany said, the vision here kind of put out by H2 at Scale with from Department of Energy. Of course, there's a hydrogen connected as a connector between all of these different technologies. Lots of ways to generate the incoming energy and that can produce the hydrogen. And then once the hydrogen is produced, of course, it has a lot of different uses, of course, for vehicles and for fuels. A big one you'll see is for ammonia and metal refining and other chemicals as well. And then, of course, there's always, if nothing else, there's just the latent heat itself as well. But as Bethany said, the real excitement with hydrogen over the last couple of years comes from the opportunity of coupling the hydrogen or coupling the electrolyzers to renewable energy. And I guess the one thing I would have disagreed with what Bethany said at the beginning is that a lot of the excitement is coming from or a lot of the work is coming from changes in policy with CO2 and such. And that's true to an extent, but to a much larger extent, what's driving all of this is the rapidly decreasing costs of renewables, which makes hydrogen very viable. And I'll show that with some of the economics. For hydrogen, of course, everything you're hearing about it, what is causing all the buzz is the use of hydrogen for coupled with renewable for energy storage, for mobility, and such. But what's lost in that is that currently hydrogen is already a $130 billion industry. And depending on how cheaply you can make the hydrogen, you can address more and more of that market. Of course, everybody is assuming that this market is going to grow incredibly quickly, with estimates in the trillions of dollars over the next couple of decades. So where is hydrogen being used right now? You can see the two biggest uses, of course, are for refining. This is in the oil industry, and it's pretty amazing if you think that if all of the, of course, when you frack, or not during fracking, but in the petroleum industry, when they do the refining, generally what they're usually doing is taking large molecules and making them into smaller ones, and of course that takes hydrogen. You break a hydrocarbon in half, and of course those new end groups need hydrogen. Generally, they get that from reforming the hydrocarbons that they have on site in order to generate that hydrogen. But if we replace that with green hydrogen, for instance, we would reduce 10% of the CO2 emissions that come from from the entire oil industry. The next large one, of course, is ammonia. Currently, almost all in most Western countries, in Europe and in the United States, most ammonia is made from natural gas, and in China, it's made from coal, but that is an extremely CO2 rich process, of course, because they take the hydrocarbons again, use water gas shift reaction to generate the hydrogen from the hydrocarbons and giving off CO2. Over here, you can't really even see the little sliver of the pie right there. That's 0.2% of all the hydrogen is currently used as mobility. So it's there is a huge area or market for hydrogen already without these new markets. And the point I want to make over here is that depending on how clean the hydrogen needs to be or what pressure that is needed, that dictates what price that the market is willing to pay for it. Of course, mobility, they're willing to pay quite a high price. That's about the price that Walmart or Amazon will pay at the pump to plug power to power their fuel cell forklift trucks and such. And that's because they need high pressure and they need absolute purity. So again, the more cheaply that you can make it, the more of this market that you can capture. And we'd love to be able to capture all of this without the use of subsidies, and I believe we can. So again, Bethany touched on the different markets for hydrogen. I broadly classify them here as power to power. This is, of course, taking the electrons and making the hydrogen, and using the hydrogen and going right back to electrons, of course. Power to product, ammonia and steel being the largest two, but there are others as well. Float gas, for instance. And then power to mobility. This is, of course, Plug Power's bread and butter, or where they've really grown over the last 5 years, particularly. They've shown where hydrogen, unsubsidized, can give a real strategic advantage over batteries, and be economically viable. And again, that's all unsubsidized. So of course, what I'd said is what's driving all of this is of course the lower cost of renewables, and again, kind of on the NREL theme here of hydrogen at scale. Wind to hydrogen is an area we're particularly excited about, and for me a little bit more so than solar, but I've done a lot of modeling in this region, and by far you get to the lowest cost of hydrogen when you couple wind and solar together. But the biggest reason that wind is a bit more attractive is normally you have larger capacity factors. So so if even very good solar, you get a capacity factor around 20 or 25%, depending on where you are in the world. So that means that your electrolyzer is sitting idle for 75% of the time. So also, but with a combination of wind and solar, you're really able to increase that. Another use for the hydrogen is pumped directly into the natural gas pipelines. Currently in Europe, they're trying to one up each other to an extent about how much hydrogen that they will allow to be put into the natural gas lines. This is an insanely huge market. To put it into context, we already mentioned that the hydrogen market is over $100 billion. If only 10% of the energy in the natural gas lines came from hydrogen, that would be many multiple times all the hydrogen that is used today. So that's obviously a very exciting potential market. It's also a difficult one though too, because if the only value you're getting out of the hydrogen is the latent heat, it's a little bit harder to compete with the natural gas. What really excites me is large scale energy storage. And I'll say right off the bat, we can't compete with batteries for the day-to-day shifting of power. So if you're taking solar and you're taking that peak solar at noon and you're moving that to the peak usage at around at around 6 or 7 o'clock at night for 4 hours, we can't compete against batteries. Batteries are going to be cheaper. But however, if you if now you want to save for a full day or a full week or even a season, then hydrogen is extraordinarily less expensive, because as we go from 4 hours to 8 hours, of course, the only thing, our electrolyzer stays the same size, our fuel cell stays the same size. The only thing that changes is our storage, and hydrogen storage is actually extremely cheap. That's actually the when you think of what energy storage is, when you compare a battery versus a hydrogen system. With hydrogen, of course, the energy is stored in the tanks, and in the batteries, it's stored in the battery. So if you double the amount of storage time for hydrogen, you're just doubling the hydrogen storage. But for batteries, of course, you're doubling the number of batteries. So it's somewhere around, depending on the economics, it's somewhere around 8 hours of storage where we become very competitive. Okay. How are we going to market? And we're not very different than the other hydrogen players here as well. So hope this isn't too much advertising. I don't like that when I'm watching a presentation. But we're developing a 1 megawatt skid here. It's really horrible that electrolysis has borrowed from fuel cells. For fuel cells, it makes sense because to talk in terms of energy, because that's your product. You're getting so many kilowatts out of the system. But on the electrolyzer side, 1 megawatt, depending on how efficient you are, can get you different levels of production, of course. But in general, 1 megawatt of power will get you about 1/2 a ton a day of hydrogen. So at Plug Power, we're developing 1 megawatt trailer there or container that can be used on site, and these are for places where the generally like for materials handling location, for instance, metal refining where the need of hydrogen isn't particularly great. But all the effort is really is coming into the larger units now. It's crazy when Giner was trying to sell itself to Plug. We were saying, well, we might be able to do 5 to 10 megawatts in 2021, and maybe 30 or 40 the year after that, and maybe 100 by 2024. And shortly after we were purchased, 20 became 50, and 50 became 100, and 100 became 200. So our goals currently are to get out 100 megawatts by the end of this year, and up to 500 megawatts by next year. And we should have 2 gigawatts under our control by 2024. And those aren't just wild projections. Those are a lot of those are already cited and in the works. So for all of those, it makes more sense rather than have containerized units to put it all under the same roof. And we do that in 5 megawatt modules, which you see on the left side there. So every 5, if you have a 100 megawatt plant, there'll be 25 megawatt modules, and each module will have its own dryer, water purification, power supply, and balance of plant. That way you can bring them up or take them down based upon the needs of based upon the size of that location. So we got a quick preview here. This is kind of exciting. This is the first drawing of the facility that they're going to break ground on soon. This is just outside of kind of halfway between Rochester, New York, which where Plug Power does the majority of its manufacturing, which is only about 2 hours from Niagara Falls, and about halfway in between, they're going to put the plant here, and this will get green energy from Niagara Falls, and it gets it 24/7. So it makes it a great first application because it gets very cheap continuous stream of electrons. And this is actually, the hydrogen here is actually for Plug Power's own use. So you can see they have a couple of tanks of liquid hydrogen storage there. And each of those captures about 3 or 4 days worth of hydrogen. I think it's a couple of tons of hydrogen in each of those tanks. Just to give you an idea of how much more how much better the energy storage density is for liquid compared to the gaseous storage. Each of these can contain, let's say, close to a week of the plant's output, and all of the gaseous storage here combined contains about 1 hour of output. So clearly, the liquid hydrogen is a much better way to store and to transport the hydrogen. Although by myself, I look very much forward to the day when there's a much better hydrogen infrastructure with pipelines, since that will greatly reduce the costs. My job, of course, is to improve the technology at the base of this. And this is the stack technology. And the top here, you see a stack with one of our repeat units in a megawatt stack. There's just over 100 cells inside of that stack. In 2020, the cost of the stack was here, and then just by joining Plug and having access to their purchasing power, so buying the membrane cheaper, buying the catalyst cheaper, the carbon, the titanium, just tapping into that supply network, we were able to drop the cost by about 35%, just with the same build of materials. Going to next year, we're gonna change our MEA design. We're also going to change a number of the materials in there. And here, a big component, even though everything in there is really expensive. I mean, you have 316 stainless steel, almost 1,500 kilograms of it, and you have titanium and platinum and iridium and expensive membrane. But labor is still an expensive component because historically, through Giener, we built these for NASA, and we built them for Navy, for the Department of Defense. So labor was never really considered, but working with Plug now, out of their current factory, they're making 250,000 MEAs every month. So we're going to be able to greatly scale that up and drop the cost quite a bit. And then when the volumes go up to about 1 gigawatt per year, we're projecting that we're going to have dropped the cost by over 80% from where we were in 2020. And I'll have to say, in 2020, we were competitive with the market, and we were competitive with Alkaline as well. Not so much on a megawatt type of a basis, but a total cost of the molecule basis. So that's when I say we're really excited about how this technology is scaling, and we're not just dropping the cost, we're also increasing the performance. So on the y-axis here, we have the current density. We operate at 3 amps per centimeter squared. Of course, the easiest way to make the stack cheaper is just to put more electricity through it and generate more hydrogen. That also generates more heat, and it's forced to operate at higher temperatures. And generally, that will. Oh, I'm running out of time, says Bethany. That will, as the output goes, your efficiency will go down. So this is where we're operating right today. What we're testing right now, what we're going to release in a couple of years, is the red line here. So we can move up and increase our efficiency and get the reduction of cost by 15%, or we can double our current density and stay at the exact same efficiency as well. I'm going to jump through here. So like I said, I really want hydrogen from renewables to compete directly against natural gas. And a lot of people think that is crazy, but I'll just break it into a CapEx versus OpEx type of an argument here. The OpEx side right here compares the cost of solar and the cost of wind. This is the amount of solar and wind that you need to make a kilogram of hydrogen, compared to the cost, the equivalent cost of natural gas as a function of location. So you can see in many parts of the world, we're already competitive from an OpEx side of things, except the United States. United States natural gas is incredibly cheap. Every time they put a straw into the ground, they find natural gas somewhere else. But then on the CapEx side of things, people have always said, "Oh my God, electrolysis is way too expensive." But that was because we were doing it at a very small scale. This is the largest SMR hydrogen reactor in the world. It's in Louisiana. And you can see it down there. This is the largest plant we're talking about building right now. So you can see on a CapEx side, we're getting right to those costs as well. So I'm going to see if I have one more interesting slide. If not, Bethany, I'll let it go over. We wanted me to talk about vehicles, but this is probably about a 5-minute talk. The only point I want to make across here is the biggest knock against hydrogen is always on vehicles, and it is a knock. And people say, "Look, my Tesla can go straight from solar to the solar panels directly to charging the car, whereas hydrogen has to go through here. It has to run the electrolyzer. You have to go to storage. You have to go to the dispenser. You have to go to here." But the main part that is missing from all of this on this side of the equation is the storage. Of course, everybody's driving their cars during the day, and you can't directly plug it into there. And it's when you have to, if you have to go to the intermediary step of storage, that's when we really become competitive. Okay, so I'll wrap it up there, Bethany.
Great, thanks, Corky. That was a wonderful overview. Thanks for providing that helpful background content on sort of just the landscape of hydrogen production and green hydrogen right now, as well as the exciting things that you guys are up to at Plug Power. So thank you. So we are going to shift from North America to Australia, and we're going to have Alan Yu be speaking from Lavo. Alan has over 15 years of experience in corporate finance, banking, and investment management. He's currently the Chief Investment Officer of the Providence Asset Group and the Chief Executive Office of Lavo. Prior to joining this group, Alan held executive roles at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia and Westpac Group, where he held executive positions in corporate banking divisions. He has proven experience in assisting companies with their growth strategies through capital raising, trade acquisitions, and pre-IPO processes. And we're excited to hear about Lavo, which is from what I understand, the world's first integrated hybrid hydrogen battery. So Alan, take it away and tell us about the exciting work that's happening in Australia.
Thanks, Bethany. Thanks for having me here today. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's good to represent Australia and showing what's the possibility of the green hydrogen and what's happening in Australia. So as Corky mentioned, the storage is a key component to plug in to develop this whole hydrogen ecosystem. That's where we are, and that's where Lavo trying to find the solution to fill the gap. So at Lavo, we have a family of different brands cater for different sort of service and offering. Key things, Lavo as a were the first hydrogen technology company introduced to the residential and the commercial segments. We launched last year about our hero product. It's a Lavo system. And that's cater it's a 40 kilowatts output that cater for like the average household can take like off grid for 2 or 3 days. And in now we also going to launch the new utility scale we call a Lavo Hills. That's focused on the sort of utility scale containerizer solution for the solar farm and other sort of renewable generation asset integration with the hydrogen storage. On top of that, it's catered for the future hydrogen export from Australia to the rest of the world. On top, that's we got the intelligent centralized asset management system. That's help us to optimize the performance of the generation asset and the operation and the hydrogen storage assets. In layman term, you can see we can interpret the Lavo is like a Apple iPhone in the Lavo family, and the Lavo Hills is more like a Macro Pro, and Frank is our iOS. So Lavo's strategic position, given we have this patented metal hydride act as a solar sponge, we can store significant amount of energy that given us a unique value proposition to capitalize the 3 key elements in developing this technology in the rising hydrogen economy, but also capitalizes the largest solar penetration growth in the Australian market, probably for anyone's benefit. In Australia, we have like nearly 2.6 million households that already have rooftop PV system. As the largest solar penetration market, obviously there is a strong demand for the large storage solution. At the Lavo, we develop because our metal hydride is quite versatile and scalable. So that's why we develop a range of products. We got the Lavo system that's catered for like a residential and a business use case. We also got a larger sized containerizer solution for utility and the transport. On top of that, we also showing the possibility hydrogen can be used in a different form, can be used for cooking, mobility, and for heating. That's why we introduced a Lavo barbecue and a bike, which are going to launch to the market by end of this year and early next year. So why hydrogen and why now? Because Charlie mentioned, 10 years ago, no one believed that hydrogen is the future, but now today we believe hydrogen is a right solution for today and for the next few decades in terms of what's the demand and what's the potential economic market. We talk about by 2050. If 18% of the final energy globally going to be used by hydrogen, that's going to create 30 million jobs. So green hydrogen definitely provides an opportunity for us to decarbonize and decentralize and redevelop the regional ecosystem in Australia. So in Australia, we have rich resource of wind, solar, sunlight, and abundant unused land. That's give us a unique value proposition to need to capitalize our natural resource to see how we be the leader in this hydrogen economy. Corky mentioned the electrolyzer. Obviously, electrolyzer split the water into hydrogen and oxygen, creating a hydrogen, green hydrogen, and we have the solution to store in our patterned metal hydride solution. But there is another missing piece: is a hydrogen fuel cell. How are you going to convert a hydrogen into the electricity? That's where we needed the fuel cell component. And the fuel cell market is also growing, and as probably Corky also mentioned before. So the potential hydrogen fuel cell in Australia is like in most of the hydrogen projects, you needed the fuel cell if you convert it back to electricity, and also in the mobility sort of segments that require a larger volume and an incremental demand of the fuel cell. What's the potential for hydrogen storage and export in Australia? And because our unique value proposition and a geographic sort of linkage to the Asia and the European market, so that put us a really unique value proposition to focus, develop this green hydrogen export market to those strategic key countries like Japan, Germany, South Korea, and Singapore. We're looking to transport our sunlight and wind to as a hydrogen energy carry to the rest of the world. What's our technology? Why we say we unlock the issue about storage? Because we have this patterned metal hydride, it's like a metal sponge. Basically, we absorb the hydrogen in a solid state. The technology has actually been developed by one of our leading research organization in Australia called University of New South Wales. The metal hydride technology was in the lab, sort of going through the lab development since 2009. And we decided to commercialize this technology since early 2019. And through the 2 years sort of commercialization journey, we finally be able to, working with intelligent scientists and research fellows and engineers, we finally be able to launch the product last year and attracted global interest. Our metal hydride, in terms of energy density, is sit well above the lithium battery, but just close to the fossil fuel. We currently talk about right in the middle between the lithium battery and the fossil fuel. But our future R&D is focused on, if we get the current metal hydride is about a 2% density if per weight. And if we reach to the 5%, that's going to be on par with the fossil fuel. How's our metal hydride technology compared to the rest of the storage solution? We focus on this. Our metal hydride use the common minerals and the non-toxic sort of minerals, which can be used in a different scale and be able to it's more about a focus on the sustainability components. It can be reused after 30 years lifespan, and we can just send the metal alloy back to the furnace to remill it and reproduce the new metal hydride. So it's 100% reusable and a recyclable solution. The safety is definitely our key, because the metal sponge is stored once the hydrogen been produced through the electrolyzer, it's already at a 30 bar. We basically absorb the hydrogen at the 30 bar, which is a low pressure application, and can be stored in a room temperature with a much higher energy density as compared to liquefied or pressured one. Because the metal sponge, it works like a pros. You can actually put the atoms closer to each other, which means can give us much more in hydrogen weight stored in the metal hydride. And another things we hear is more about we have the capability to have a long lifespan as compared to other metal hydride. We have a 20,000 charge and a discharge life cycle. That's probably equivalent to 30 years lifespan. So this is probably just to summarize the previous slides in terms of what you see in the market: a liquefied, pressured, ammonia, and the other MCH pathway, which is still early days. The fifth one is our metal hydride solution. It's not just as I say, it's not just the sustainability and the safety components which we overcome the issue, but it's also we're capable for DC side integration. Lavo system, we basically capture the energy output, like when PV system generate electricity is a DC output, so we be able to actually capture the DC output of electricity rather than taking from the AC side. That's another sort of 20% sort of energy lost of energy capture. How the Lavo Hills system also demonstrated the green hydrogen export potential. As I say, this system diagram probably just showing you we can integrate it with different renewable energy generation assets, either wind or solar or other sort of pump hydro. It's more about how integrate different generation assets through the electrolyzer process to generate a green hydrogen that can be stored into our Lavo Hills container storage, and that can be used for transport both domestically and overseas as a carry of the green hydrogen, or we can reverse engine going through the fuel cell, can generate the electricity and send it back to the grid. So Lavo is already have 40 sites locked in Australia. We have the 40 solar farms in Australia is going to use Lavo Hills solution, the utility scale, and in the next 3 years we're going to roll out 1.2 gigawatts hydrogen storage in Australia through the 40 solar farms in the regional solar farms. One of the first one we're currently doing, it's actually got the federal government funding to help us to fast track the commercialization of this solution in Australia. The first one is going to be in the Victoria region. It's a working partner with University of New South Wales, University Technology Sydney, CSIRO, and a leading engineer company like a GHD, and also the connection service provider like a PowerLink or Osgrid. Yeah, the second demonstration is going to be in another region that's left 30 megawatts, sort of fully integrated commercial ready demonstration site, which is going to roll out in the early first half of next year. That's going to be in another sort of regional community in New South Wales state in Australia. This is probably just to summarize the benefits for the integrated solution we provide introduced to the market. It's also good for the greater connection stability, and also be able to, in terms of green hydrogen production benefit, that can be generated in a dual income resource. Or either you can convert it back to the electricity, sell the electricity at the in a market, or you can transport the green hydrogen, which green hydrogen has a commodity value as well. That eventually de-risk the future any sort of renewable energy asset development risk. How commercially viable of this? Basically, based on different use case, the energy storage, if we talk about the use as a firming sort of electricity output, our current sort of levelized cost of energy is sitting at about 120, that's Australian dollar megawatts an hour. That's probably on par with the lithium battery. But we have like a 6 or 8 hours storage duration. It's much more cost competitive if you put that sort of lens together. We target a levelized cost of energy. It's going to reduce down to 80 megawatts. That's give a benefit. The electrolyzer and the fuel cell cost is going to we're going to foresee the cost significant cost reduction curve in the next few years. That's I'm saying here the LCOE is also included the actually solar or wind generation output. In terms of hydrogen production, we currently focus on export to Japan based on our current technology and the current cost. We already about $3 kg of hydrogen output from like Australia to Japan. We targeted by 2025 that we're going to reach about $1.50 per kg of hydrogen export. We also are working with the leading like electrolyzer and the fuel cell suppliers in the world. So we're going to partner with the NASDAQ, which is a global leading PEM fuel cell manufacturer. We're going to set up localize the actual NASDAQ fuel cell production line in Australia. So this JV going to be the largest fuel cell manufacturer in the South region. Next year, started from next year, we're going to produce about 100 megawatts output, and by 2023, we target 300 megawatts, and by 2025, it's going to reach 1 gigawatt. Yeah, this is about an introduction about the NASDAQ, why why the leading technology NASDAQ is providing. I think Bethany's here. Probably I just quickly go through. We're also working with different research organizations, focus on the provide a development training course to upskill the future workforce. This is just a quick snapshot of what's the potential product. Maybe just landing here. Sorry, Bethany, there is a video if anyone.
Yeah, so I think Ryan, I don't know if you can take over if the videos.
Yeah, the video won't play in WebEx.
Yeah,
okay.
maybe we just they kind of play on here.
Right. Yeah. What you can't play the video in WebEx. But
WebEx. Can you take control, right?
You can. Hang on 1 second.
We might be able to post it online with the slide deck if we are able to play it here, Alan.
Yeah, that's probably better because it's a huge file and it's going to take some time to get it downloaded again.
That's fine. I think probably time Good,
Okay.
good to wrap up from here. And yeah, for anyone interested, yeah, maybe we get Bethany and Ryan to post the video online for you to review later on. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Alan. That was a great overview of the Lavo's technology and what's happening in Australia with some of the solar to hydrogen demonstration projects. So exciting to see how those shape up moving forward. So thank you for taking time to share that with us. So we're going to move from Australia now to the North Sea, and Elizabeth Endler is going to lead us in that journey. She's currently leading Shell's global research program in energy storage and system integration, and serves as the principal science expert in electrification, integration, and storage. She's a chemical engineer by training and has over 17 years of experience in industrial research and development, including work in fundamental research, product development, and technology commercialization, as well as project development and valuation, venture capital investing, and mergers and acquisition support. So she's done it all. Elizabeth is based in Houston, Texas, so she doesn't actually live in the North Sea, but she has some exciting work to share with us today on what Shell's been doing there. Her background, she holds a BS from the University of South Carolina and a PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So Elizabeth, I'll let you take it over.
Thanks so much, Bethany. Really excited to be able to share the work that my colleagues are doing in the Netherlands, in the North Sea. We are a global company. We do work globally, but all credit goes to the folks who are on the ground and whose work I am representing, because I've only had the privilege of being involved in parts of this. So it does take a village to get these projects of this scale up to date, and I'm just very grateful that I have the chance to talk to you about it today, because it is a really interesting journey, and I hope complements some of the work that we've already heard from Corky and Alan. This is just a brief legal piece. If you're interested in investment information, please go to www.shell.com/investors. To give some context as to why we are interested in offshore wind coupled to hydrogen very broadly, Shell is an international energy company, and recently this slide is from some information shared in February by members of our executive committee. I really think it summarizes in a nutshell what and why we are doing what we're doing. It's really about powering progress, providing energy solutions to customers that accelerate our transition as a company and the world to net zero emissions. And we talk about this both purposefully and profitably. And the point at the bottom around net zero emissions is really, really critical. We are very much working with our customers and sectors, whether that's industry, whether that's agriculture, whether that's cities, whether that's technology, lots of different aspects that are looking to decarbonize. And this is all in service to our aspiration to become a net zero emission company by 2050 in line with society. We do, that does encompass scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So to that point, there are a number of levers that we're looking to pull to really help us accomplish that goal. And when we look at driving low carbon energy supply and customer solutions for energy products, we have a number of different elements. And I bring these up because I think it really speaks to the concept of energy system integration going beyond electricity system integration. And so for us, when we think about what do some of these levers look like, it's not only the supply and generation of electricity, but it's also looking at where can we directly electrify. It looks at how do we manufacture products in a much more circular manner from end to end. It looks like hydrogen supply. We've heard about that. I'll speak a little bit more to that as well. And for emissions that are incredibly difficult to abate, it also looks like nature-based solutions in the near and medium term. So electricity is very much core to Shell's strategy in terms of moving to low carbon solutions for customers. Shell has a very integrated approach to electricity, and this is really highlighted by the example proof points on the left, which encompass everything from offshore wind. So I'll talk more about the wind farm Hollandse Kust Noord as part of this project. It also encompasses solar. Gangari in Australia is utility scale solar projects that we have. It encompasses end user things, whether that's batteries through Zonen, whether that's through mobility, through New Motion and Green Lots. Borsela 3 and 4 is another offshore wind farm. So I think this gives you a sense of the scale, whether it's generation, whether it's commercial and industrial, or whether it's residential or on the go through mobility. There are a number of scales, a number of demand loads, and a number of things that we look at to really drive integrated value. So coming back to electricity and thinking about how do all of these different pieces integrate with one another. Electricity is a very high quality energy source. You can do so much with it in terms of satisfying end user service demands, doing useful work in a very thermodynamic sense. And when we start with renewable electricity, that really changes the paradigm, because historically, when you're in a fuel-based system, electricity is very precious. It's the very end of the chain. And now with wind and solar, we're starting there, and that really changes how we think about this. One of the things that I wanted to highlight that I used this chart for is that, again, I talked about electrification of demand a couple slides ago. When you have those electrons, the most efficient thing to do is to use them where you can, and rather than putting it through storage, rather than putting it through different conversions. But that's not always practical, particularly if you need, for example, feedstock in industry. And so hydrogen is your first step on that staircase, going from an electron to a molecule. We can then think about going to more simple molecules, going beyond hydrogen, for which hydrogen is a base, whether that's methanol, ammonia, things of that sort. And we can also think of larger hydrocarbon, larger chain links. These, you do lose efficiency as you go forward. Certainly if you're going into fuels and then coming back to power, that's also, you will take some hits there as well, which is why we're continuing to look at how do you stay as close to the top of this chain as possible, and when do you really need the storage that comes along in those chemical bonds. This next slide is one I showed actually last year at an ESIG talk on industrial flexibility, and I think it's really important here too, because it really talks about, you know, what do we do today in the electricity system, but also what do we look at sector coupling. And this gets even more pronounced when we're talking about hydrogen, this interplay between whether it's power to molecules, power to heat, power to power, and all of these different considerations with flexibility. When we look at hydrogen from an energy company, an international energy company perspective, we see it as being a very promising vector for a very low carbon energy system. And this really comes at the fact that you can enable this generation, this large scale generation, by being able to help manage supply and demand balance a bit better. It also goes into the fact that you have the demand for this as a product. And in particular, I'll talk a little bit more around the element of industry as well as coming into feedstock for the projects specifically that we're looking at in Northwest Europe. So switching gears a little bit to offshore wind specifically, and how this comes into the picture. Shell absolutely sees offshore wind as a growth area for electricity. And this is both from I would say a regional level, a technology level, as well as a country level. And so to highlight some of this regional and national elements around offshore wind, showing here from November of 2020, the European Commission's offshore renewable energy strategy. And I think it's really kind of coming back to how this talk was framed originally, what's in your future? I think a couple of things really here to note. One, the scale of the turbines themselves and the growth that we've seen over the last 30 years, just absolutely tremendous. And that growth in scale really starts again to get you to think differently around what can you do, because that's just so much more energy production than we had available to us early on in the offshore wind business. In the EU specifically, just the growth in the number of projects that we've seen, going from the megawatt scale to the gigawatt scale, and tens, and even looking further out to hundreds of gigawatts. Again, a lot more capability to look at a highly integrated electricity and energy system more broadly. So coming now to the national level and looking at what is happening in the Netherlands specifically, there's been a lot of focus around offshore wind as a very large contributor to the Dutch energy sector. And that's very important as again, decarbonization targets are being looked to be met through a number of different resources. Offshore wind has a very large role to play there. What I'm showing here on the right, and apologies that it's in Dutch, but in a nutshell, the key here is that the tender for the Hollande Kunst Noord project explicitly called out the need for innovation and integration. So really not just saying we want renewable electrons out of this project, but we want to take the opportunity to also look at what can we do for it better integrating wind going forward through some demonstrations within this specific project itself. So innovation-wise, what is being done in this project? It's really about using different complementary technologies to provide electricity when you don't have necessarily the full out production from the farm at its peak. And so again, what we're doing here is 5 different elements in an innovation to really show what can be done by whether it's addressing wake effects, whether it's having more intelligent wind turbines, but really this complementarity piece, coming back to hydrogen and different things, looking at how does floating solar potentially complement the offshore wind generation profile, but also how do we couple batteries and hydrogen together to really help address some of the intermittency. We're also then bringing in some additional elements of integration, whether that's around just other power electronics or things like that, but wanted to just highlight the fact that this was in fact part of the original request when the tender was made by the Dutch government. To go into a little more detail around what this looks like, I started out by talking about the Borsela 3 and 4 offshore wind proof point that Shell's involved in. That is on the order of 713 megawatts of nameplate rated power, and it is offshore wind full stop. Production, pretty typical offshore wind farm. The HKN project, Hollande Kunst Noord, is this, as I mentioned, offshore wind 759 megawatts nameplate, coupled with this offshore hydrogen battery storage capability. So again, you can just see a little bit more of the components here. And this is an example of the maturation into a future hydrogen wind power hub concept that you can see here on the right. Again, the same components that you would have, but at larger scale to, again, help address the challenges of variability, intermittency, as well as sector coupling. So specifically to talk a little bit more about what I talked about wind and hydrogen at the Port of Rotterdam as the title. This is a complementary and adjacent project to the innovation work I just talked about within the wind farm itself. So when we talk about hydrogen at the Port of Rotterdam, particularly green hydrogen, we're talking about the announced roughly 200 megawatt electrolyzer sited at the Port of Rotterdam that would take wind from the HKN project and use it to power this 200 megawatt electrolyzer to produce eventually on the order of 50 to 60,000 kilograms of hydrogen a day. And so what you can see over here on the right, where we see the outlet for that green hydrogen is at our refinery at Pernis, which is also in the Netherlands, not too distant away. From, again, you can kind of trace where things are going here, where you've got the wind farm, you've got the electrolyzer, you've got Pernis. And this is, again, we have chosen to be the off-taker for this project to use that hydrogen, that green hydrogen, in our refinery processes, much like what Corky was talking about. Hydrogen is very much used today as it says here, green hydrogen initially replacing gray hydrogen at the refinery. That gray hydrogen is what is produced today from natural gas through steam methane reforming. So again, we are choosing to be the off-taker there to really, one, demonstrate the whole value chain, as well as the implementation of that green hydrogen within a refinery setting. We do see this as step one in a journey along this power hub piece, because we do also see eventually the opportunity to provide green hydrogen into other sectors as well, including heavy duty transport, as illustrated in this bottom picture here. Finally, I just wanted to highlight again, when we talk about energy system integration, it goes beyond the electricity piece, it goes even beyond the hydrogen piece. As you can see in this figure on the right, it really involves a number of different aspects, whether it's data, power, hydrogen, gas, or even potentially CO2, because as we look to decarbonize, we have a number of levers, as I mentioned earlier, that we're looking to pull to make this successful overall. And so when in this particular case, we're looking at the opportunity for digital to help simplify this system complexity for customers as a whole. And so when we look at, whether it's, again, offshore wind, whether it's industrial use, whether it's heavy duty vehicles, there's just a number of aspects that go into this. And so I just wanted to come back and say, yes, it really is fully about integration. It's about having the customer-led, customer-partnered solutions and pathways as we go forward. So with that, I will say thank you for your attention and turn it back over to Bethany for Q&A.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate you kind of hitting home the two sides of the equation here, that we have to maximize both the supply side, how we produce the hydrogen in the first place, but also the demand side and where that hydrogen is going to be ultimately used. And we've talked throughout this session about many of those different end use applications. So thank you for hitting that home, and really interesting to hear about the current status of the offshore wind to hydrogen work in the North Sea, but also kind of what that future vision is. It's pretty exciting to see that. So thanks for that great overview. So we'll switch over to the Slido platform, and Ryan, I don't know if you want to bring that up on the screen, but we have quite a few questions. I'm just going to go in order of the voting as best as possible, with maybe chair's privilege to kind of group a few together as we go. But the first one, I think, will probably be an easy question, but an important one. There's lots of different colors of hydrogen. You'll hear we talked about green. Elizabeth just mentioned gray. There's also blue. I just learned recently that yellow is also another one. So if one of the panelists wants to give an overview of those, I'm happy also to kind of jump in, but we'll let the panelists speak first. I don't know if Elizabeth, do you want to just, or Corky, yeah, whoever. Go ahead, Corky.
It's easy. The green hydrogen is generally any hydrogen that comes from directly from renewables. So that's using some sort of renewable power to power the electrolysis. Gray hydrogen is the steam methane reforming. That's getting it from the from coal or natural gas. And the blue hydrogen is in between. It's using the exact same processes. You're using the coal and the natural gas as before, but you're sequestering the CO2 so that you get it, but you don't generate you don't emit the CO2.
Yeah, and then I'll jump in that yellow is hydrogen produced from nuclear. So where you're using nuclear electricity and steam to produce hydrogen through electrolysis. So that was a new one to me, in case that's helpful. But great question, whoever asked that. That's good to get that clarified. Okay, so the next one, what are some of the technological bottlenecks to realizing power to gas to power? So I think one of the examples here, and I think Corky, you mentioned this, is where a certain amount of hydrogen can be injected into existing natural gas pipelines that can then be used, in whatever the downstream natural gas uses. I don't know, Corky, if you want to maybe jump back in, since I know that was something you touched on in your presentation, but others, Alan and Elizabeth.
The question directly, there aren't really any technological bottlenecks. I think that Elizabeth showed quite well the round trip efficiency isn't great. That's always a that's always a problem. And in there, we have going in our favor is the decrease in cost of the primary source that makes all of this a potential. So technologically, though there's really no again, the electrolyzer technology is there. We know the durability is there. So I wouldn't say there aren't any bottlenecks there. Of course, we would like a cheaper method to store it, of course, in between as well, where you have a cavern and such available. Storage can be extraordinarily cheap, close to $1 per kilowatt hour, but in tanks it's close to $20 per kilowatt hour. I don't know if I heard from Alan what the cost is in hydrate, but I think that's fairly high too. So that becomes when you start looking at very large scale utility scale for weeks. Storage, unless you have underground, storage becomes the largest component of your cost.
Just to maybe dig in a little bit more, and I'm not sure if this was where the person who asked this question was going, but what about on the, if you're doing purely combustion turbine end use, and let's say you want to go 100% hydrogen to that combustion turbine, what sort of bottlenecks might exist in that use case?
Yeah, I'm not that. I've only briefly looked at I'm not the best one answer. Maybe Elizabeth is. I've looked at that a little bit, and I do know that they compare favorably compared to fuel cells, the hydrogen turbines in terms of efficiency and cost as well. So I do know that that's a viable path, but I'm not very familiar with the particulars.
Okay. Elizabeth, do you have anything maybe to add there?
Sure. I think one of the things there, if you're talking about, typically historically when people are talking about taking hydrogen back into power, they are talking about fuel cells versus combustion. So that making sure you're clear on which one you're talking about is step one. And in terms of talking about combustion and things of that sort, one of the things is, again, you do have to look at materials. It has been proven out. There are examples in the industry where people have run combustion. New projects are coming online. Anytime you're doing combustion, also, you do have to think about emissions, which is a little different from a fuel cell. So it's not necessarily a bottleneck, to Corky's point, but there are different considerations with those different pathways.
Great, thanks. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go. Oh, go ahead, Alan. Yeah.
Bethany, maybe I'll also add in terms of like a fuel cell, we're currently working with NASDAQ, for instance, the efficiency is about between 60 to 68% when you obviously release the hydrogen and convert it back to electricity. But on the other hand, because it's not just convert it back to power, it's more about how you capture the heat. Going through the sort of conversion, that's another way use of energy to enhance the efficiency.
Right, thank you.
But one last thing there where I would chime in, Elizabeth, this isn't a direct comparison as well too, but I was shocked to find out that we've come so far down the cost curve of fuel cells that we're looking at some of these, providing continuous green power to some of the data centers for the large data center operators, which are typically, a typical data center is 200 megawatts. So that's a very large installation, and they'd like to go green. And I was interested to see our fuel cell costs are comparable in terms of dollars per kilowatt with the diesel gensets that they use. So we're directly competitive today.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. That was some really good input there. We'll move on to the next question, which actually I think there's a couple that are grouped together for Corky, although I want to make sure we spread across everyone here. But I guess we'll just start there since it's the next one. So Corky, what's the round trip efficiency for going from gaseous hydrogen to liquid hydrogen and then back again to gas?
I saw that question in the thermodynamicist inside of me cringes because you're going from here up to a high state back to a low state. So technically the denominator is 0, but I think I get what the questioner is getting at. It takes about 50 kilowatt hours. The theoretical amount of energy it takes to make a kilogram of hydrogen is in the mid-30s, depending on the pressure and the temperature you do it at. But let's call it 35. Typically, an electrolyzer will take close to around 50 kilowatt hours to make that kilogram of hydrogen. A fuel cell can go back and get about 40. But to go from the pressure hydrogen that costs you 50 kilowatt hours, it takes about an additional 10 kilowatt hours, maybe more, to up to 14 to make that into liquid hydrogen. And then, unfortunately, we don't do a very good job. I don't know anybody that does a good job of recapturing any of that energy as that liquid. You know, obviously as that liquid expands, you can capture some of that and stuff. But as Elizabeth well knows, all that heat transfer is expensive, and both from an energy standpoint and a capital standpoint.
Great, thanks for that. I guess we'll just go ahead and knock this other one out too. That was addressed to you, Corky, but I think Elizabeth and Alan, you might be able to chime in here too with any comments you might have. But how does hydrogen compare to large-scale hydropower plants for long-term energy capture and storage? So just comparing kind of to traditional, pumped hydro storage.
Maybe I'm jumping. The pump hydro, it's got its limitation because it's not be able to apply or deploy that sort of storage in any sort of geographical location, because it has and second, it must be large scale. The hydrogen, the metal hydride storage solution we're developing is quite versatile, and it can be applied into the different scale, and it's easy to deploy in a decentralized model.
Yeah, that's great input. Thanks, Alan. Elizabeth or Corky?
I think I would just add again, coming back to the time scale piece, that's really the really critical differentiator. Hydro tends to work at longer intraday time scales versus longer when you're talking about pumped hydro very specifically. Again, run of reservoirs and things like that for traditional hydro does have a seasonal component, but not the same way as pumped hydro, which is, I think, probably what is being talked about for this question.
I'll just add that I love pumped hydro. If everywhere in the world was Norway, where they had nothing but rain and mountains, I'd probably be out of the job. But everywhere is not Norway, so pumped hydro is the gold standard. It's compared to hydrogen, it does have better. It's similar on as we drive the cost down, we might get similar on a kilowatt type of a basis, although they're still cheaper. But then when you add in the round trip efficiency as well as the ability to store for long terms, it's really hard to. That's pretty hard to compete.
Yeah, great. All good inputs. Thank you to all three of you. Okay, next question. What is the future for high temperature electrolysis or the hybrid sulfur cycle? These systems have much higher efficiencies than low temperature electrolysis. So this gets into some of the high temperature versus low temperature trade-offs. I don't know who wants to take a stab at that.
Well, I built a hybrid sulfur electrolyzer. So first of all, I'll say they're horrible. I mean, they're absolutely they are just horrible. And in general, as if you're going to use renewables, it's really hard. And I guess the most of these cycles, when people say that the efficiencies are higher, they usually say that the heat is free. Now, hybrid sulfur, you're going to, I forget, it's 800 or 1,000 degrees C, and that heat, whether it comes from nuclear or concentrated solar, it's not free. I mean, it's you can boil water with that heat. You can do lots of good stuff with that heat. So I'm not a fan, and certainly the solid oxide electrolysis. I think that will find a niche. Up to now, it's really hard to cycle that. Of course, and when you're looking at renewables, you absolutely are going to have the ability to cycle on and off, and also you want to be able to generate at pressure as well. Nobody's really shown the capability to do that yet. It's with that. And the other thing you have to remember is I remember the first time I saw a solid oxide polarization curve, and you see you're producing a good amount of hydrogen at 1 volt or so, and I was like, oh my God, I'm out of a job. And then you stop to think of it. The thermal neutral voltage for hydrogen is over 1.4 volts. So any voltage under 1.4 is it doesn't do you any good, because you're running an air conditioner, right? And the solid oxide, generally they put the stack inside of a gas furnace to keep it hot, because if you're under 1.4 volts, it's an endothermic process. So you're consuming heat, and you have to do something to keep that heat going. So if you're if that's the case, again, that is good heat. There's lots that you can do with that heat. But I do think that for applications where say, in fact, even the what's going to be Plug Power's first large scale application, where they're getting 24/7 hydrogen, 24/7 electrons from hydro, and they're going to run the electrolyzers 24/7. I think there is a real case to be made there for the solid oxide. It's really a hard problem to ramp, again, because of those different thermal expansion coefficients and such. It's a really tough nut to crack.
Yeah, thanks, Corky. And I know there was, I'm trying to find it right now, but there was a question at one point of someone asking about kind of the difference between that constant output of producing hydrogen constantly, or having to kind of do these ramping up and down, and what sort of trade-offs exist with those. So that's helpful that you spoke to that point in this response as well. Alan or Elizabeth, do you have any additional comments on this question?
No.
Okay. Great, we'll move to the next one. Thanks, guys. What are the cost differences for hydrogen in dollars per kilogram, depending on what the hydrogen is used for? So I think this is getting at basically like the supply curve discussion, and sort of what the end uses are, and how there's different costs for those that can result in some a supply curve for the collective set of end uses. And I think there's probably a lot of factors that play into that. So I'll let you guys discuss those. I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe Alan or Elizabeth, if one of you, since we've had a lot of questions for Corky.
I guess it's more about to your point. It's more to depend on the end users, what commodity value they're willing to pay for the hydrogen.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if maybe there's certain examples, if it's ammonia, or if it's steel production, or if it's for transportation, or if it's for some other kind of product. A lot of that is driven by the alternative, natural gas based. Yeah, so there's a lot of factors, and as Corky mentioned, the price for gas varies pretty widely across different geographic locations. So this is pretty variable, and there's other factors that play into it as well. Yeah, if that stimulates additional comments from you guys.
Yeah, and also the hydrogen, if you use for refilling station, that's a different use case, and obviously that's have a different price tag on that. And for especially you needed to factor in sort of like a gas pipeline sort of infrastructure capex upfront when you use the hydrogen.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it would help if do you guys have rough numbers for what the bounds typically are, kind of the range?
Not sure what you mean by that. The bounds range of the cost of hydrogen, or the.
I'm picturing a supply curve, and maybe I'm going the wrong direction with this, but I'm just trying to get a sense for what sort of dollar per kilogram numbers we're talking about for different end uses. So if you imagine a supply curve with the different end uses
Sure,
that,
sure. Yeah, again, the bottom of the supply curve is, close to $1, just over $1. That's just for oil refinery. And again, it's really because it's a captured market, right? They already have all the equipment, they have the oil, they have the natural gas, they have everything right there that they need in order to do the cracking. And they don't need it clean. They don't need it clean. They don't need it dry. They don't need it pressurized. So here so for us to compete there, that's really hard because we're gonna bring in our hydrogen, which has all these benefits of being, extremely pure. We can pressurize it, and they don't care. They don't need it. So it's that's the most difficult. Then you move up to ammonia, which does need a certain level of purity and does need a certain level of pressure. So you can move up that supply curve. The price is a little bit higher, and then you get to finally mobility, where you need everything. It has to be extraordinarily pure. It has to be completely desulfurized. It has to be at thousands of hundreds of bar of pressure. So all those things add to the cost.
and what does that top out at generally in terms of the dollars?
Well, so currently, if you pull up your Mirai to a gas station in California, it's going to cost you about $15 a kilogram. If you have a captive fleet where you're using that hydrogen a lot, you can get it, and you're buying it from Air Liquide. It's going to cost you $6 or $7 a kilogram. We certainly see a path for that localized fleet kind of a use where it gets down to $3 or just over. But that's pretty impressive because that is we can get much lower than that if we don't have to compress and store, because that gets to be the highest cost.
Great. Awesome, thank you. That was really helpful. And I guess I'll just put a selfish plug in here too. I mean, I wasn't part of the report, but NREL's H2 at Scale report that I mentioned at the beginning that came out in October has some really good background information on a lot of these different aspects that if you're kind of looking to, sort of an introductory document to kind of, learn a bit more about this topic, that's a good one to start with. And I know supply curves are discussed in there. Great, well, let's keep moving. Maybe we'll do one more question, just looking at the clock here. Great, so what does the water for the plug power hydrogen unit need to be fresh water, or can salt water be used?
Yeah, it absolutely has to be not just fresh water, it has to be deionized water. Having said that, we can start with salt water. And if you have a large installation and you start, your ocean side and that's your water source, the cost of that desalinization process is a penny or two per kilogram of hydrogen. So it's not a driving factor whatsoever. What is a factor is when you're inland, like if you're inland in California, it's not that that it's a lot of water usage to get a kilogram of hydrogen, but it's the laws and such. For instance, if we take tap water and we deionize it, we can't have more than 50% of a reject stream, even though that reject stream just has twice the amount of magnesium and calcium and is perfectly usable for drinking or showering or whatever. It's just the rules are there and you can't do it.
I see. And just super quick, yeah, and I know that this question was addressed at Plug Power, but Elizabeth, I'm curious, has this come up in the conversations with the Rotterdam or any of those other kind of offshore wind hydrogen facilities where maybe salt water could be used? Has that come up at all?
Yeah, so it is definitely something that is on our radar screen in terms of how, what does a current system and a future system need to look like, because, and certainly how does, when you talk about system integration broadly, what are you trying to accomplish and what makes sense in terms of siting and those kinds of things. So certainly, yes, it is a holistic consideration in terms of what use you're looking to put the hydrogen forward.
Great, that's helpful. We are running out of time, and as much as I want to keep going here, we're going to have to stop, but we will follow up on the remaining questions. And I know it looks like the next one, it would have been for Alan. So sorry, Alan, we won't get to that. But just want to thank everyone for taking time to join us today, especially our three panelists for their great presentations and really good feedback here during this discussion period. Also for all the audience members for your questions. I think we've had some really good insights into the changing world of green hydrogen, and we learned about some of the other colors of hydrogen as well. And I hope this provided some stimulating food for thought for everyone on this call. As a reminder, we'll follow up, and I just mentioned this, with written answers to the questions that we didn't get to during this question and answer period. So time to wrap up. And just want to remind you that the spring workshop sessions are being held on Tuesdays and Thursdays through April 8th specifically. We have a session next Tuesday on the wonderful world of energy storage, chaired by Bob Zavadil of Enernex. There's no charge for the session, and you're all invited to attend. For more information and registration, go to the ESIG website at www.esig.energy. So thank you all again for your participation. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you again on Tuesday. Take care.